Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter for boxing related tweets, or you can subscribe to the channel, hit that notifications button and get a new notification whenever a new video is uploaded. This is the final video of our Euro 2020 boxing series, mini series with a twist, a boxing historical twist. This video might be a little bit longer than the others. There's a lot more to talk about. Look, I hope you guys have been entertained. It's nowhere near as popular as I thought or hoped it would be, to be honest with you. I thought there'd be more crossover interest from some of my subscribers. Maybe it's because Euro 2020 has been so saturated in terms of coverage. People just thought, you know what, I've got my existing sources, can't be bothered to check out these videos. But for those of you that have, I've gotten some terrific feedback, so I really hope you guys have enjoyed it, all the boxing historical stuff. When it comes to the football stuff, look, I would never take credit for the stars of the team and listing them because they're self-explanatory, they're evident. But if you look at some of the ones to watch, Berardi for Italy got an assist, Moore for Wales got a goal, Munier for Belgium, a goal and an assist, Mack for Slovakia. It went down as an own goal in the end, but his shot hit the post and went in off the keeper, and it was a terrific run in the build-up to that to make that happen. Sabitzer with an assist, Glenn Kamara was probably man of the match for Finland. Group C, we spoke about having a lot of goals, and indeed it probably more goals than any other group, and it has indeed delivered in that regard. 9 goals in just 2 games. So there's been a lot of information on football that, you know, as you guys know, I'm a football consultant by trade, and yeah, I think there's been a lot to nitpick through that. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Let's get on to talking about this final group: France, Germany, Hungary and Portugal, the group of death. And let's start with France. And their star man, of course, Kylian Mbappe. You're talking about a man who is the star of the current World Cup winners and the favourites to win the European Championships. And that tells you all you need to know at merely 22 years old. I mean, it's incredible, really. He is a very, very dangerous player, direct, pace, can make things happen when you're not expecting it. Yes, he prefers a team to play a higher line for him to run into, but even if they're deep, he'll drop a bit deeper himself, and he's very swift in transitions, and he's going to be one to watch without a shadow of a doubt in this tournament. But in terms of the one to watch that maybe is a little bit out of left field, I know he looks about 13 years old and lives off of a diet of tofu and lavender chai tea lattes, but don't let the boyish look fool you. Jules Koundé is a star in the making. He might not actually get an awful lot of game time here. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play at all. He's only 22 years old. He's a centre-back. And so unless they're looking to hold on to a lead, he might not get that many minutes. And listen, there are more experienced defenders there who might get brought on ahead of him if France are looking to hold on to a lead. Nonetheless, he is a very, very talented young footballer and one you need to know for the future. He's at Sevilla. He's already been linked with big clubs. So get to know the name Jules Koundé. And moving on to their fighter, well, you'd have to go with Marcel Cerdan, the middleweight who, listen, his story is pretty unbelievable and pretty, well, it's tragic, really. This man's story has appeared in movies. So let's talk about Marcel Cerdan. Marcel Cerdan was one of the best middleweights of all time, a Hall of Famer, one of the, well, considered the best French fighter that has ever been produced. He was born in what was then French Algeria. He ended up with a final record of 110 wins, 65 came by way of knockout, just 4 defeats. And of those 4 defeats, only 1 was a stoppage, and we'll get into that in a little while. He was also somewhat of a ladies' man, or at least the sort of, he had a love affair, I guess you could say, that has been immortalised as the rest of his life has on film. He had an affair with Edith Piaf. She was the famous French singer that sang La Vie en Rose. She's almost the quintessential French sound. If you hear her voice, if you hear that song, it will transport you straight to Parisian streets of yesteryear. Check out that song, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen her, if you still don't know who she is, she's that woman who has short hair and looks like she drew on her eyebrows with a pencil. Let me just show you her so you know exactly what I'm talking about, in case you think I'm making it up. Look at that. I mean, I understand we were from a different era, girl, but what did you do? Pick up a biro and start drawing on your face? Come on, Marcel, have a word, son. But regardless, it was a passionate affair, and ultimately it was the sort of affair that would lead to his untimely demise. He had some fantastic wins. We'll get onto that in a moment. He had some fantastic wins. He beat the likes of Tony Zale, a fellow Hall of Fame middleweight. He stopped him in round 11. He beat Dick Turpin. This was a terrific fighter. And he then fought, of course, Jake LaMotta. And, you know, Cerdan, he was a world champion. He was defending his title, but he got dropped in the first round. And when you're up against the Raging Bull, who puts on that sort of incessant pressure, you can get caught a little bit cold. You can get dropped in the first round. But he got dropped heavily and dislocated his shoulder. But to show you the warrior that Marcel Cerdan is, he got up and continued to fight, and he made it all the way until round 10 against another Hall of Fame middleweight who would bring incessant pressure and put that sort of pain on an opponent. So that tells you all you need to know about the sort of heart that this guy had. So as you can imagine, when there is such a dramatic and yet, I guess you could say, freak injury that occurs, there's demand for a rematch. This guy went 10 rounds with one arm against Jake LaMotta. What would he have done with 2 arms? Let's see how it goes. Let's see the rematch. He begins to train for it. Everybody's looking forward to a rematch between 2 terrific middleweights. Unfortunately for him, he was in training camp and decided that during training camp he wanted to visit Piaf, his mistress, and she was performing in New York, so he boarded a plane to go and see her, an Air France plane, and tragically that plane collided with another plane, and this was in the Azores, in the islands, and he and 37 other passengers, including a French violinist called Ginette Neveu, were killed in this accident. Truly terrible stuff. Jake LaMotta paid his respects as you would expect, and so on and so forth. Edith Piaf, the love of his life, the true love of his life, even though she was a mistress. She wrote a song, Hymne à l'amour, and that was dedicated to Marcel Cerdan. Since then, of course, his life has been immortalized in film. There was a film he actually starred in, which he starred in the role of his own father. That was interesting. It was called Edith El Marcel, and it was a French movie, and it's more recently been immortalized in a different way too. There was a biopic picture called La Vie en Rose, which followed the life essentially of Edith Piaf, and he obviously appears in that too. So listen, he's obviously a legendary fighter. There is an indoor arena which is used for boxing, it's used for basketball. Palais de Sport Marcel Cerdan, also in Paris, named after his honour. So in French sport and culture, this man is immortalised. One of the great middleweights. It's a shame the world never got to see that rematch. He died so young at the tender age of 33 years old. Let's move on from Marcel Cerdan and talk about Die Mannschaft, Germany. For me, as far as I'm concerned, their star player is Joshua Kimmich. He's a player that can play. Kimmich can play in defence. He can play in midfield. He is just capable of being a real driving factor, full of energy. The Bayern Munich star. He will be hoping that he can inspire what is a talented German squad, but doesn't have the powerful names of yesteryear. In terms of one to watch, I've tried to go a little bit out of left field. Again, quite literally, he plays at left back. Robin Gosens. He's a marauding left back or left wing back. He's playing for Atalanta, and they do produce a lot of those types of players. Look at Cristiano, who's at Leicester. He's also prolific for a defender, and because you've got Serge Gnabry that is likely to play on the left, he likes to cut inside and really go for goal. You'll see that he would like to hug the touchline, but he'll also go into spaces. He'll exploit spaces by making diagonal runs into the box, in almost in behind, in the path of Serge Gnabry, much like a tailwind. He'll be in that and trying to capitalise on that tailwind. He'll be a threat even from left back, so he's someone to look into. He should be entertaining. Moving on from Gosens, we'll talk about the boxing, and there's only one guy I believe that we should point to here, and that is Max Schmeling. In my opinion, you have to apply context to understand who exactly he was and to understand his record, because when you look at his record at face value, 56 wins, 39 of them by knockout, that bit's really impressive. But then it says 10 defeats, 5 of which were by knockout and 4 draws, and all of a sudden people are saying, okay, so he had a good career, winning record, but maybe he lost to a lot of guys. I know he lost to Joe Louis. Joe Louis got his revenge by knocking him out early in round 1. He can't have been that good. But then when you start to analyse it and look into it, you start to realise that even before he fought Joe Louis, before he even beat Joe Louis, in fact 3 years before he beat Joe Louis, he lost to Max Baer in the 10th round, and he was actually considered to have been past his best at that point. It was the 1933 fight of the year according to Ring Magazine, but the general consensus was Max Baer got the better of him. Schmeling's no longer who he used to be. So then 3 years later, when he goes and faces Joe Louis, and he knocks him out in the 12th round of a 15-round fight. And Lewis was also down in the 4th and the 12th rounds, and that was also the fight of the year. You start to say, wow, what you should be saying, wow, what a performance. In the same way how Muhammad Ali came back, was past his best, and still had some fantastic performances and victories, that added to his mythology, added to his legend. With Max Schmeling, things were a little bit different, and much of that is down to the political situation of the time, and how that seems to have been carried into the modern day. Because obviously you had the Nazis rising in the 1930s, and so the fight against Joe Louis was considered almost like a battle between worlds, between cultures, the free West and the Nazis, the authoritarian Nazis. This is how it was essentially put into the public consciousness in the Western world. It didn't matter what Schmeling's individual views were, it didn't matter who he was as a human being. He represented the Nazis. That is just how it was. Now, it should be said, by the way, that he never joined the Nazi Party, and many years after his death, it actually emerged that he played a role in saving a couple of Jewish children as well. So this wasn't some evil man, but he was just caught up in the context of that time. He happened to be German, and Germany happened to be controlled by the Nazis. But because of that, the coverage of the rematch with Joe Louis was not, okay, well, Max Schmeling is now way past his best. It was, now it's time for the Western world to prove its superiority. He needs to get revenge. Joe does. And he did indeed by knocking him out in the first round. And that shows that the first fight was a fluke. But if you fast forward to the modern day, does the second fight between Whyte and Povetkin really tell us anything about the level of Alexander Povetkin, or who was superior between the two fighters? Does it really tell us that? What if that fight had happened 5 years earlier, right? So it's very difficult to judge Schmeling on that, but history seems to almost undermine him. He had also fought Jack Sharkey, and he became the heavyweight champion via disqualification, the first heavyweight that happened with. And so a rematch was essentially inevitable, and it occurred 2 fights later, and Jack Sharkey won the fight via split decision. And it caused a lot of controversy. There was a lot of controversy surrounded the bout, and the NYSAC actually barred any non-boxing experts, that meant anybody that wasn't a sports writer, referee, or a judge, from broadcasting descriptions or commentary of future matches. In other words, they only wanted people that were boxing people to describe matches so that it could be essentially judged fairly. There's obviously a lot of controversy surrounding that one. Like I said, he also lost to Max Baer in front of a crowd of 53,000 people, and that was the first promotional venture of Jack Dempsey, and he had to raise money for it. The fans that were present essentially had to contribute to that happening. He had other good wins too. For example, Michele Bonaglia earlier in his career, who was undefeated. That was for the European title. Sorry, he was defeated. It was 21-1 though, but he was highly rated for the European title, and he got him out of there in the first round. So listen, he was a very, very good fighter. Sometimes I feel like maybe he's a little bit underappreciated, because if he was past his best when he beat Joe Louis the first time, or when he then lost to Joe Louis, he was well past his best. And I understand why things were portrayed the way they were due to the elements of the time. But I think in retrospect, it's fair to say that he's, a very good fighter, and we should give him a lot more credit than he currently gets. He deserves more than that. He actually fell in love with boxing by watching another guy who was a contender for being on the list for the best Frenchman ever. Not quite Marcel Cerdan as far as I was concerned, but he saw Georges Carpentier and his fight against Jack Dempsey. His dad took him to see him, and he loved Dempsey, was so impressed with Dempsey. And Dempsey, of course, was a pressure fighter. Mike Tyson has often spoken about Dempsey being one of his inspirations. And Max Schmeling was a technician. So nothing alike. And that should be a lesson to all young fighters, because what I tend to see a lot of, and I see this a lot with Floyd Mayweather and the idea of a shoulder roll, is guys trying to emulate fighters where they don't have the same physical attributes. Always try and learn from a guy, even if he's not superior to your favourite fighter. Always try and learn from a guy who's more reflective of your style. Pick up on things that you can learn. Yes, you can also learn from others, but try and emulate guys that are more like you. There's no point in trying to jump on your toes and be Muhammad Ali if you're very top heavy and quite flat footed by nature. It's only going to harm you. There's no point if you don't have an iron chin and cat-like reflexes with a big power punch of trying to fight like Mike Tyson, right? You've got to have what, you know that phrase, dress for the body you have rather than the body you want. It's the same sort of thing. If you're a dude and you got titties, don't start dressing like some dude from, I don't know, the Chippendales. Don't wear one of those little see-through vests. He's showing his pecs. You're showing your mammary glands. There's a difference, you know what I'm talking about. Or if you've got really like skinny chicken legs like Deontay Wilder, don't be wearing those ultra short Speedos like David Hasselhoff. And even David Hasselhoff, David Hasselhoff used to ask the directing team not to film him from the legs down. He didn't want his legs in there because he had skinny legs. And it's funny actually because he's recently had the jab and he put a video up of himself tensing his arm, trying to show, you know, this muscular arm and encouraging people like all celebrities seem to be doing right now to go and get the jab. It's just hilarious looking at him. It's like, dude, you've got the arms of a prepubescent 13-year-old girl. Put that stuff away, man. Nobody wants to see it. That's the point. Dress for the body you've got, not the body you want. And Max Schmeling fought with the skill set he had, not necessarily the skill set he admired with Jack Dempsey. He was a technician and a big puncher, ranked on Rig Magazine's 55th he was in 2003 when they made the list. 55th greatest punchers of all time. So shout out to Jack Schmeling. And moving on from him, we get to Hungary. And their star man for me is their goalkeeper, Peter Galassi. And I'm sorry if I butcher any of these names. I'm trying my best. I know he looks like the sort of guy that came 12th in a Prince William lookalike contest. But this guy is a really, really good goalkeeper. Very experienced. As you can see, he's tall and agile. Look at him flying through the air there. He's going to have to be on his best form, and he will be under a lot of pressure, no doubt, because they are in a monstrous group. And the Hungarians, you know, they've produced, arguably, this is the irony here, Hungary have produced arguably the best team of all time, the best international team. And that was in the 1950s when they were led up by a guy who, again, is arguably the best of all time, Ferenc Puskás. Let me just put things into perspective for you for a second. England at the time were considered the very best team in the world. And they'd heard about this team in Eastern Europe, these commies, and who were they? They can't compete with us. They're supposed to be the best team in the world. When they saw Puskás, one of the English players looked at him in the on the pitch in the warm-up, and they said, "This is the little fat guy that's supposed to be quality." Well, put it this way. Hungary ended up winning the game 6-3 at Wembley. Now, obviously, people thought in England, look, this was just a fluke. We undermined them. We'll get the better of them. They had another game. Both of these were friendlies, but there was a lot more on the line here. They wanted to prove they were superior, and so did the English in that second match. And Hungary won 7-1. So put that into perspective in the modern day. Imagine whoever you think is the best team in the world today. France at the moment, they're rated the best. So let's say there's some team from behind an iron curtain and they say, no, we're the best team in the world. And the French laugh and we go, yeah, all right, wait till Mbappe and Griezmann and all these lot get at them, right? And they lose 6-3 in Paris. And everybody says, well, they were undermined. France will get the better of them next time. They're going to go to Hungary this time around and they're going to do better. And they lose 7-1. Well, Hungary are nowhere near the level of that great side. Definitely the best international team not to have won the World Cup. But what a fantastic side. Moving on from that, they're nowhere near that, like I said, anymore. Moving on from Galassi, there's a young player. As you can see, a good-looking young man. If he asked your girlfriend for directions, you insecure guys out there, I'm sure, would start getting rather worried. Dominik Szoboszlai. Someone help me out, man. But anyway, Dominik Szoboszlai, a fantastic talent. You have to watch out for this guy, but he's injured and he misses out on the tournament. So I'm not picking him out as the one to watch, but he's 20 years old. In some aspects, he reminds me a little bit of Ronaldo, a little bit, but obviously different sorts of players and positions. But there are elements there. This guy could become a superstar. He's someone you need to remember in the future. He's going to be very marketable too. So keep an eye on him in the future. He won't be at this tournament. Shattered dreams there, as you can see. So the one to watch for me is Willi Orban. A very solid defender who can ping a ball as well, diagonally really, really well. Look out for him. He'll also be under a lot of pressure in this group. In terms of their best boxer, you've got to go with this man here. You know, Laszlo Papp was the sort of guy who goes under the radar again because he developed behind the Iron Curtain. You have to ask yourself how many fighters from behind the Iron Curtain we were denied the skills of. The entire landscape and history of boxing might have looked entirely different had fighters from the Eastern Bloc been allowed to compete in a professional setting back then. This man was an incredible amateur with a purported record of 301 wins, 12 defeats. The one place that they were able to show their skills was at the Olympic Games, and you saw his Olympic performance. At light middleweight and middleweight, he won a total of 3 gold medals, 3 different Olympic Games, London, Helsinki and Melbourne. He was superb. He also had 2 European amateur golds. He then turned pro eventually. He had hand problems by then, and he would travel to Austria, and from there he was able to train and fight in the pro game essentially. And he ended up with a professional record of 27 wins, 0 defeats and 2 draws. This man was a phenomenon. He was incredible, and he should really be considered one of the best middleweights of all time. But because of the fact that much of his mythology and his legend was behind the Iron Curtain and was at amateur level, we don't give him the credit he deserves. But you know, you have to, in my opinion, give these guys their due. He is part of the International Boxing Hall of Fame, but nonetheless, when you're judging somebody like Lomachenko, yes, his career, his professional career, is a Hall of Fame career. Even with a 14-2 record, what he's achieved is brilliant. But to really understand who Lomachenko was, you have to be able to look at that professional record. That amateur record. You have to be able to appreciate that. And if you don't, you miss out on the essence of Lomachenko and how special he was. And you have to do that with Laszlo Papp too. Because only 2 other fighters, both Cuban, were ever able to win 3 gold medals at 3 Olympic Games. So congratulations to Laszlo Papp. You're representing Hungary in this little mini-series. Which takes us on to the Portuguese national team, and obviously the star man, Cristiano Ronaldo, needs no introduction. His statistics alone make him one of the best of all time. Just his statistics. He'll be hoping to add a 2nd European title with Portugal. They've got a terrific coach in Fernando Santos. They can be solid and organised. He helps bring them together. It's his speciality, really, to apply organisation while getting a team to play beautiful football. And they can do that. They can play really good technical football. And they showed that at the last European Championships. And they'll be hoping to get out of this group and go on a run. And the one to watch, I've got to go with POTE, or Pedro GONCALVES, as his full name is. He's a Sporting Lisbon attacking midfielder. Watch out for this kid. Another superstar of the future. He's 22 years old. He won't start for Portugal, but expect him to come on and have a real impact. I think Jota will have a really good tournament as well. I think Portugal will have a really good side if they can be defensively solid, and that is Santos's speciality, because you know Pepe is aging at centre back. So if they can keep things tight, you've got a really good team here. In terms of their boxer, we go to this giant of a man. There isn't much in terms of competition for this role, but Jose Santa, or Santa CAMARAO as he's known. And you have to understand, this dude, at a time when the average height of a man was 5'5", bear in mind nowadays it's 5'9", this dude was 6'8". So he's 1 inch shorter than Tyson Fury, but at a time when the average man was 4 inches shorter than he is now. So this dude was massive. And if you look at that photo on the top left hand side, that's him against Primo Carnera. So 2 giants fighting each other. What? That must have been seen like a proper freak show. Something biblical, just giants running around, a bunch of Nephilim having fights in the ring. So that would have been a big show back then. 69 wins, 48 by knockout, 20 defeats, 7 of which were by knockout. Like I said, Portugal isn't exactly a giant, no pun intended, in the boxing world, but this guy stands out for them. He competed at a high level. He was able to get in the ring with guys like Primo Carnera, and he ended up with a good account of himself in terms of his record, but he wasn't, you know, some sort of superstar fighter or anything like that. But he was a good fighter, and he represents Portugal. Qualifiers, well, little vortex there. I've gone for Portugal and France. The Germans will always be a major danger. I don't think they're quite the team they used to be. I think the Portuguese are going under the radar. They are the European Championship holders, and they won the UEFA Nations League as well. There are actually 2 tournaments I had bets on Portugal winning. So neither one surprised me, even though they were considered somewhat of a shock in terms of results. France, though, are justifiably the favourites to win this tournament. I believe Portugal can do it. So I think it's between Portugal, France and Italy as the 3 strongest sides. But we're in a situation where a bunch of teams have hopes. They all harbour hopes. But yeah, I think we happen to have had 2 of the best 3 teams in Europe fall in the same group. And while the Germans are very strong, I do think that these 2 teams will get through. When you've got such a strong group, in terms of group of death though, even the slightest error could cost you getting through. Because it's the best 3 teams that qualify, it's possible that Hungary end up being the whipping boys of the group. But Hungary being quite solid, looking to play on the break, looking for set pieces, if they shock one of these 3 teams and take a result, who knows what could happen. So it's a really interesting group, the best group in terms of the mouth-watering prospects. In terms of the fights, I've gone for Laszlo Papp, which I know a lot of people are going to find controversial because the majority of what he did was in the amateur system. But you just can't ignore the level of this guy and what he did achieve in the amateur system. You have to look at his career holistically. And it's not like he ever lost in the pro game either. 27 wins, 0 defeats, 2 draws when he was past his best. So you've got to give Laszlo Papp massive props. Marcel Sedan just pips Max Schmeling into the conversation here. Listen, guys, I really hope you guys have enjoyed this mini-series. Those of you that have watched it, those of you that have watched it that might know other boxing and football fans, share the videos. Who knows? Listen, at the end of the day, there's a lot more boxing than maybe people have assumed. Maybe that's why. Maybe they're just sitting there thinking it's all football and, you know, I'm saturated with it. I've got other areas where I can look to that. But if you know anybody that likes history, share it. Hit that like button, notification button. All that good stuff, guys. Help the channel grow. I really appreciate everybody. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of Euro 2020. Take care and God bless.